I'm Jennifer Hopwood. I have a background in entomology and ecology, and I've been with Xerces Society for 16 years-ish. And I'm based in Omaha, Nebraska. That's where I'm coming to you today from my basement. And I'm really thrilled to be here and to talk to you today about some of the invertebrates that you can find in your soil. I think we all know how important microbes are, bacteria and fungi are really doing a lot of the heavy lifting in soil, but also invertebrates make it all possible. So I'm super excited to go through profiles of these groups with you. And as you already heard from Kelly, soil life is hugely diverse. So we're going to dive in. And these are the protozoa. These are the smallest organisms, and we're going to start small and just get bigger. Protozoa are less than a millimeter in size, so they are only seen with microscopes. And they used to be considered animals, and now they get their own kingdom. So truly, they're their own group doing their own thing. They are all single-celled, and they live in water films, and they can be found throughout soil profiles. So in shallow soil, but also as deep as 200 meters. And these critters are really important in nutrient cycling. They feed a lot of the time on bacteria, and in that process, they release nitrogen, and that nitrogen is in a form that plants can use. So it's an incredibly important source of nitrogen for plants and really helps with plant productivity. So this is our only non-animal group today. And now we're going to move into the invertebrates. And 99% of all soil animals are invertebrates. So I'm skipping over the vertebrates, with which you're probably already very familiar, to focus on animals without backbones. And insects make up about 80% of this group. So we will come to them in a little bit. But still starting small, we're going to talk about rotifers. These are animals that live in water films within the soil, sometimes in leaf litter too that's really moist. And they are predators and scavengers, and they eat bacteria, protozoa, fungi, and algae. And you can see they have these little projections on their head. These are called cilia, and they whirl those around to create a vortex in the water films that pulls in their food. This is a group that, because they are dependent on this water film, they can enter a period of stasis when it gets really dry. And amazingly, they can reanimate after that period of stasis. And it can be a decade or so in which they can be reanimated. And actually, truly amazingly, scientists have reanimated rotifers from permafrost. So they estimate that those rotifers were over 20,000 years old, which is truly unbelievable. Just amazing. Another crazy fact about these animals is that we only know about female rotifers. Rotifers appear to reproduce asexually, and even with that, they've been to diversify. So really interesting and unique group. Next up are tardigrades, which also hang out with rotifers in water films and in the leaf litter, and they are also really dependent on moisture levels. And tardigrades are also known as water bears. They have these stubby legs and claws and really do sort of resemble these little miniature bears. And they too can be kind of fierce predators, hunting down protozoa and algae and rotifers. And then they also scavenge fungi and algae too. Tardigrades too can enter stasis, in which all the water leaves their body. They release, kind of enter the suspended animation known as cryptobiosis that helps them survive dry conditions. And they too can be reanimated when moisture is added. So, for example, old plant specimens like moss specimens were added, water was added to those many decades later. And then it turns out there were tardigrades in there as well that could be reanimated too. Also, tardigrades are known for their amazing ability to resist radiation and their extreme tolerance to very cold temperatures and very hot temperatures. And a fun fact about these soil animals is that they were the first animals known to survive the vacuum of space. 10 days in space without air. Nematodes. This is a group of animals that are pretty well known. They're one of the most numerous animals on the planet. And they play a number of roles in soil systems. This picture down here in the right-hand corner shows their different mouth parts, and different nematodes feed on different critters. So the bacteria feeders have these soft mouth parts on the far left. The plant feeders have the piercing, sucking mouth parts. And then the predators of protozoa and tardigrades and rotifers have these more intense, scary mouth parts over here to the right. These also live in water pores and water films, and they can go pretty deep in the soil, and they too can enter the state of suspended animation, cryptobiosis, to survive dry conditions. And this is another group that was reanimated from permafrost and has been known to survive thousands of years in that suspended animation phase. The plant feeders, some can cause damage to crops, some can be reach that threshold of economic damage. And then there are also nematodes that are animal parasites, including human parasites. So this is a hugely diverse group. Next up, getting to the even more visible, are potworms. This is a group that's somewhere between 1 and 30 millimeters, so you can for sure see it with the naked eye without a microscope, but they're very small. And they really just look like small earthworms, small white or light colored earthworms. They're segmented worms and are related to earthworms, and they also feed on similar things as earthworms. They eat decaying organic matter and ingest soil, and they'll also feed on fungi and bacteria. So they are moving through the soil and integrating organic matter as they move. So on a small scale, they are ecosystem engineers. This is a group, though, that's most often found in the upper soil layer. They don't really dig very deep. Our really large-scale ecosystem engineers are earthworms, and I'm sure you're really familiar with this group already. They're really well known for improving soil structure. They burrow throughout the soil, and as they go, they're ingesting soil particles, and out their other end comes really packed with nutrients. Their earthworm casts are just packed with nutrients. So they really accelerate decomposition and make more nutrients available to plants. And as they're tunneling and burrowing, also they're allowing air and water to reach deeper soil layers, and they're mixing. So they're really moving a lot of soil and benefiting a lot of soil in a lot of different ways. And earthworms can live in 3 different places and within the soil. They can exist in the deep, deep soil, then they can exist in those soil layers, and then also on the soil surface and leaf litter. And different species really hang out in different parts of the soil. Earthworms can regenerate some of the lower parts of the segments of their body. All earthworms have both male and female organs, so that if they chance upon another earthworm, they can reproduce. And they're pretty long-lived, as invertebrates go up to 4 years. And in the southern states, there are quite a few native species that still exist. There are no native species, for example, where I am in Nebraska and north of me, and especially in the area of the United States that had heavy glaciation. Native earthworms are not found there. But in the southern states, they can be pretty diverse, especially in natural areas. But there are also quite a few introduced species that have been successful too, and about 1/3 of the worms in the United States are introduced. Some of these introduced species are providing really beneficial services in agricultural settings, and then some are not. And to just kind of drill down into a particular group of introduced earthworms that are problematic, the jumping worms, it's about a group of 15 species that have made their way to the US from Asia, and they get their name from their behavior. If you pick them up, they thrash around wildly like a snake might respond. So that's one way to recognize them. But they also have a white clitellum, that smooth band that goes around their entire body. It's close to their head, whereas most other earthworms have a dark clitellum. Jumping worms are a problem because they do eat through the leaf litter on the surface really quickly, and they don't integrate their casts into the soil, so they're depleting the source of nutrients and habitat. So they're impacting native plants, they're impacting native animals that rely on the leaf litter. Um, and so they're slowly degrading ecosystems, particularly forested areas. So they are found in the US from Maine to Florida in the east, so north to south, all the way to where I am in eastern Nebraska. So that's through Wisconsin down to Texas, essentially, and then some parts of the West as well. So pretty wide distribution, but not necessarily even throughout that wide distribution. It's worth checking in if you are a gardener in your space and you're curious to know if you have jumping worms in your area. It's worth checking in with your extension office, especially if you like to share plants. There's no way to control jumping worms right now. The best we can do is to prevent their spread. And so that means when sharing plants, knock off all the soil. If you do have jumping worms, just share bare roots or just share seeds. Don't move compost unless it's been commercially treated and has gone through really high temperatures, because jumping worms, their eggs have a really protective cocoon almost, and it means that they're resistant to really cold temperatures and really hot temperatures at that stage. So it needs to be commercially treated. Compost does. Make sure too you're not releasing worms that you used for bait or vermicomposting. And then lastly, if you are moving your equipment between sites where you know you have jumping worms, make sure you wash off your tires, for example, to make sure you're not transporting them to new parts of your land. All right, so those are our non-arthropod animals. From here on out, we're talking about invertebrates that have exoskeletons and segmented bodies and jointed appendages. So this is the majority of invertebrates, and it's things like mites and spiders and centipedes and woodlice and insects, of course. And because arthropods have an exoskeleton, they have a hardened skeleton on the outside of their body. In order to grow, they have to molt and shed that exoskeleton every so often. And sometimes that molt is just progressive in particular life stages, and sometimes it's transformative. And there's two different types of metamorphosis. The first is incomplete metamorphosis. This is a process in which the young really look very similar to the adults when they emerge from the eggs, just smaller, without wings. And this is groups like mites and spiders, true bugs, grasshoppers, and their nymphs just grow in size, eventually reaching adulthood, in which they have wings, if they're an insect anyway. Complete metamorphosis, on the other hand, groups have life stages that look very different from one another. Examples of insects that go through complete metamorphosis are beetles, flies, ants, wasps, butterflies, and so forth. So they start out as eggs, they hatch into larvae. The larvae eat a food source that is generally very different than the adult and could be in a completely different habitat as well. Once they reach a particular size as larvae, they will enter their resting phase. That's the pupal phase, in which their body really does a huge cellular rearrangement, and then they emerge as an adult. So that'll come into play in a little bit. Okay, to dive into our arthropod groups, first up are the mites. These are eight-legged relatives of spiders, and they're small but very visible to the naked eye. And mites really play two critical roles in soil systems. They are really important decomposers. They break down organic material into bits that are most accessible to fungi and to bacteria. So they take leaf litter, for example, and just continuously break it down to make it more easily decomposed. They also move bacteria and fungi throughout the soil. And then some mites are predatory and are feeding on smaller animals in the soil, like springtails or nematodes. And they, like many other soil animals, live within all the different layers of the soil. You have mites that live in very, very deep soil, some that live within the soil layers, and then some that are on the surface and in the leaf layer. Mites can be indicative of plant communities, so they can be very specific to certain types of soils and certain types of plant communities. And because they are wingless, they disperse by relying on winged animals, specifically insects. So, for example, there are predatory mites found in dung pats, and they move between dung pats by hitching rides on dung beetles. Mites are sensitive to tillage, and so predatory mites that can contribute to crop pest control, for example, can be reduced with tillage. Springtails. These globular little animals, or animals with little elongated bodies, are named for the structure called a furcula, which is under their body, and it's used just to propel them around to move. And all they do is just fling down that furcula, and it pings them out, and they spin around and wherever they land. So it's a great defensive response. Springtails are decomposers of decaying plants and fungi. Some also are predators of bacteria and rotifers and other springtails. And you can find them most often on the soil surface within leaf layers or within soil layers. So if you're moving your leaves around in the springtime, sometimes you'll see springtails pop around. These really contribute to decomposition by consuming fungi and bacteria, and it can really influence the soil microbe communities. Next up are the woodlice, also known as isopods or sow bugs or pill bugs or roly-polies. This group has a lot of common names, and they are all decomposers of detritus, both fresh and not fresh. And woodlice are the only group of crustaceans we're talking about today. So their relatives are crayfish and crabs and so forth. And they are a terrestrial group. But like their aquatic relatives, they do breathe through gills. So they're really reliant on moisture. And so you'll only see them at times of the day when moisture levels are higher. So more often in the morning and the evening in the summertime, or in cooler temperatures. You can find them in the soil surface or in leaf layers and under logs and stones. And they are superstars of fragmenting plant debris to break down that detritus. Just like earthworms, we have a lot of introduced species of woodlice that have come in accidentally with plant material from other countries, and about 1/3 are introduced. In the South, again, species are most diverse, and particularly along river areas or shorelines or in caves, there's a lot of native species in the South. One last thing about this group is they can be used to monitor contaminants in soils because they can accumulate heavy metals within their bodies. All right, some more decomposers. We're getting larger and larger now. These are millipedes. Millipedes are named for their legs. Millipedes means 1,000 legs. And millipedes do have two pairs of legs per segment. And even though their name means 1,000 legs, it was only a couple years ago when we actually discovered the first species of millipede known to actually have 1,000 legs. Most have far, far, far fewer pairs of legs. Oh, that should be 50 rather than 5. You can't have 5, an uneven number of legs. So millipedes truly are also really excellent decomposers, and they fragment somewhere between 10 to 15% of leaf fall. So they're really breaking down leaf material at a really fast rate, and that facilitates microbes and how they are dispersed within soil. Millipedes also have, with all these legs, they're incredibly powerful diggers. They can excavate really deep tunnels in which they live, and they can be long-lived, up to 11 years. So they invest a lot in caring for their young, and they are sensitive to disturbances and can take a while to build back up. Millipede relatives include centipedes, but unlike millipedes, centipedes are predators. They don't eat plant material. They are hunters. Their first pair of legs is modified to inject venom. So they will chase down their prey, which includes pretty large invertebrates like earthworms and larger arthropods, and even larger prey like small reptiles or small mammals. And then they will inject that venom, which can paralyze their prey, and they mostly hunt at night. And they're mostly within the soil layers and sometimes on the soil surface. Another group of important predators are spiders. And spiders are predatory both as little tiny spiderlings and as adults. And they feed on a wide range of other arthropods and can contribute to crop pest control in agricultural systems. They also can move and work the soil as well. And this is a group too that also uses venom to stun or kill their prey and to break down their prey tissues. The pictures of the 3 spider groups I have here are hunting spiders. So these are spiders that chase down their prey in the soil or on the leaf layers, like jumping spiders and ground spiders and wolf spiders. These are the ones that we're most likely to see in agricultural systems. But there are plenty of web builders that sit and wait to trap and ambush their prey that are important too. Spiders can be long-lived, and they are sensitive to disturbances. So they take a little while to recover from pesticides and tillage and so forth, because this is another group that invests care in their young, so they can be slow to reproduce and slow to recover. This is a group, because of their sensitivity, needs permanent habitat for overwintering. They can't really exist within a cropped area alone and find all their habitat needs. Okay, well, let's just take a quick moment, and in the chat, I'd love to hear, have you thought about soil invertebrates before this course today? And if so, tell me how, and then I'll circle back to that in a little bit. All right, from here on out, we're talking about the insects. And this is a group of animals that have pretty much taken over the planet. All insects have 3 body regions: head, thorax, abdomen. They have 3 pairs of legs. They have 1 pair of antennae, and many have wings. And these adaptations have really led to their diversification, and they live everywhere that we live, plus many places we cannot. So half of all the known species on the planet are insects, and we probably still have many, many, many more to discover. And there are a ton of insects that live in the soil for a portion of their life cycle or the entirety of their life cycle. 80, like I said earlier, 80% of all soil animals are insects. So there's a lot of different groups, but I'm focusing on those that have particular importance to working land. So I want to highlight those, and I'm going to give short shrift to cicadas and termites and other animals like antlions that are really amazing but found in different habitats. So moving into animals that are important on working lands, there are a lot of different families of flies that are decomposers. The adults are found, of course, above ground, but it's their larvae that are in the soil and are breaking down plant materials to help with plant material breakdown and returning nutrients back to the soil. The other important group of flies that I wanted to highlight are the flower flies. These two are decomposers, they're larvae, and from here on out, I'm talking about insects that have complete metamorphosis too, so their larvae often do look very differently than the adults and do live in different places. And this group is a great example. The larvae are found in the soil where they're decomposing, or sometimes they're found on plants, like in the lower picture here. They're legless, and some are predatory. So that little tiny fly larva is tackling an aphid. You can see that aphid looks quite giant compared to that little fly larva, but the little fly larva has it all under control. So in addition to their roles as predators and decomposers, flower flies are also pollinators. The adults drink nectar and sometimes eat pollen as well. So this is a group that contributes significantly to multiple ways. And flower flies do contribute to crop pollination too, if you're growing blooming crops. This group overwinters in the soil, and so they can be sensitive to tillage, and it's another group that really does rely on permanent habitat near to crops in order to be able to provide conservation, biological control, or pollination. Okay, moving into the beetles. This is another similar group that provides that dual role of pest control and pollinators. The adults are found on flowers, drinking pollen and nectar. You can see they have leathery wing covers, very soft wing covers. And then their larvae are found in the soil or in the leaf layer, sometimes on vegetation, and hunt down insect eggs and aphids and even larger prey like snails and slugs. And they have sickle-like jaws that they use to dispatch their prey. Another group that resemble soldier beetles are fireflies. They have these leathery wing covers too. Fireflies, of course, also have luminescent organs, and those are used to create flashing patterns in the summertime that attract mates. And it's just their bioluminescent courtship really makes them just one of the most well-known and beloved insect groups. They're so charismatic. And certainly I have fond memories of childhood about fireflies. I'm sure many of you too do as well. But fireflies are, as Kelly mentioned earlier, they have a soil connection because their larvae hang out in the leaf layer and within the soil and are hunters. And they are serious hunters. This is their larvae down here, and they will track snails and slugs by following their slime trail, track them down and hunt them. And they will track earthworms by entering burrows and searching for earthworms to eat. They will also eat caterpillars in the soil too. So they are the real hunters, and they overwinter in the soil and take a couple years to mature and to develop, and are again reliant on that upper soil layer for overwintering habitat. You can find out more about fireflies in your area by going to fireflyatlas.org, and you can filter by your region, by your state, by your by your area and find out if there are at-risk species in your area, or just get some natural history information about the species that are around you. Okay, more beetles. This might be a well-known group. These are ground beetles. They are dark in color, brown or black, and the adults are predators and the larvae are too. You can see this is a good picture of the jaws. And this is an important group for conservation biological control. So they really contribute a lot to pest control and crops. So much so that some farmers have invested in planting permanent habitat strips within cropped areas that are tall bunch grasses or other perennial vegetation where these beetles can overwinter. And those plantings are called beetle banks. And there can be an economic payoff to investing in that permanent habitat and to take that land out of production, because the ground beetles can overwinter along with spiders and some other important predatory beetles, and then they move into the crop quicker in the spring with plenty of time to control pests. But this group also contribute to plant decomposition, debris composition, and some eat weed seeds as well. So this is another valuable group. And as I mentioned, are reliant on permanent habitat for overwintering. They are slow to reproduce, one generation a year. They live up to 4 years, so they don't rebound quickly to disturbances to the soil or chemical disturbances either. And their communities can be representative of plant communities also. So it's another interesting group that can be used as indicators of plant communities and of disturbance. Rove beetles live in a lot of the same places that ground beetles do. They are predators of insect eggs, and they contribute to decomposition of dead plants and also dead animals, and sometimes dung too. This is a really diverse group of beetles, and they kind of do it. They kind of do it all. They kind of break down a bunch of different stuff. And they will move into the soil and mix soil between layers too, because some do go into deeper layers. These beetles can be recognized because they have really short wing covers. So in the picture down here below, you can see their wings hanging out from underneath their short wing covers. And then also when they move, they often curve up the tip of their abdomen. So it looks a little bit like a scorpion sometimes when they're running along. And this is another group that would benefit from beetle banks. They overwinter in similar habitat as ground beetles. And Kelly mentioned tiger beetles earlier. These are predators, both as adults and larvae. And they have a really interesting life cycle. Their larva burrows down, creates a deep burrow, and then will hunt from that burrow. It'll attach itself to the inside of the burrow and has a flat head. So it looks like it's flush with the surface, and it will sit and wait for insects and other arthropods to come along, and then it will pull them into the burrow and enjoy their meal. And they're within that burrow for 2 to 3 years, so they have a long life cycle. The adults are the beautiful metallic color or sometimes brown colors, and they, as Kelly mentioned, are extremely fast runners and flyers. They have really good eyesight too, so it makes them hard to get good photos or catch them in a net, for example. They hunt in flat open areas, and are the fastest insects that we know of. Dung beetles. This is a group that is incredibly valuable in numerous ways. These are decomposers of animal dung, particularly of large mammal dung, and they are really critical in improving the palatability of forage in pastures and in rangeland, and also in reducing the habitat of parasites of livestock. There are a lot of parasitic flies that breed in dung, and dung beetles, by breaking it down quicker, reduce that habitat for those livestock parasites that are pretty nasty, like screwworm and hornworm. And they can also disrupt flies that carry E. coli to nearby farms. And so dung beetles can reduce the spread of foodborne pathogens. And throughout their work too, they also help seeds disperse and find new places to grow. So this is another charismatic group, beloved throughout human history, all the way from ancient Egyptians to producers nowadays. They're less common in urban areas, but you can still find them in some places, just not very many species. A couple quick things to tell you about with dung beetles. Different species have different strategies of securing dung, because believe it or not, dung is a coveted resource. And so some dung beetles will lay their eggs on a pat as it lies, and those species, their larvae will develop pretty quickly and also have a tendency to be predatory too, and will eat fly larvae if they encounter them in the dung. Then there are also tunnelers that find a pat and tunnel underneath to pull dung down into the tunnel to feed their young. So they provide more care for their young, feeding them slowly over time. And then there are the rollers pictured in that middle photo there. They will form a ball of dung and they will actually move it away from the dung pile to secure their own supply of dung, and then dig underground, have a little nest where they feed their young dung over time. And in particular, we've learned a little bit about insect orientation from the roller dung beetles. Like now we know they use celestial cues like the sun to help them figure out directions, and amazingly, also the Milky Way. So unbelievable stuff. There is a cycle in which insecticides that are used to control those nasty cattle parasites can be harmful to dung beetles, so that can delay dung decomposition. So there are various integrated pest management strategies to reduce those harmful insecticides while still balancing the need for treating those cattle parasites. Okay, another group of oh, I forgot I was going to show you this quick video. Let's see if I can get it to work. These are dung beetles rolling. They push with their hind legs, and they work together in a pair, oftentimes male and a female, to build their nests. Okay, another group of decomposers are burying beetles and carrion beetles. These are decomposers of animal bodies, animal carcasses. And they're often very colorful, burying beetles with orange and red and black. Burying beetles will bury where, just like their common name suggests, they'll bury their carcass, and it needs to be a smaller animal. So birds, small mammals, things like that. They'll just dig underneath and sink it down. And that's a strategy that also limits competition for carrion, which is a resource that is beloved by large mammals, scavengers, coyotes, for example, birds, and so forth. So these little insects are competing with them, so they try to bury it. And as they do, they process the carrion and inject enzymes to delay the decomposition. And then they feed that to their young over time and invest a lot of care in feeding their young directly. Carrion beetles are have a more oval shaped body, and often it's black and sometimes with a yellow or orange coloration. These beetles have a different strategy of using carrion. They tend to lay their eggs on unburied bodies of large mammals. So they're competing with plenty of other scavengers also, and their larvae just fend for themselves. So they don't have parents to feed them, which means they develop a lot more quickly, and also some are predatory and will eat fly larvae also. So this is a good group of beetles. It's really important to break down carrion because it's very nutrient rich and can significantly influence soil fertility and plant communities. This is a group that has mites that hitch rides on. You can see in the top picture there are some mites on that burying beetle, and those mites drop off and eat flies. Okay, Coming to the end of our profiles here, ants are well known for their ecosystem engineering abilities. Also, they excavate and mix soil as they construct large underground nests. Ants live in large colonies. They're a social species, which means they have an individual within their colony that does all the reproduction. That's the queen. And then they've divided up labor to really make sort of an efficient pairing, and they all work together cooperatively within that colony. So some individuals will guard the colony, those are the soldiers. Some will forage for food. There are some that are nurses that tend to the young, and some that clean the colony. It's a well-oiled machine of sorts. So they can excavate a huge amount of soil in building these nests. And you can see that picture on the right. That's a cast of an ant colony. They can be up to 12 feet deep with 10,000 workers. So they're moving a large quantity of soil, and in that process, they're integrating nutrients within soil layers and aerating the soil and helping water move deeply in the soil and plant roots travel in new directions. Also, they're contributing to decomposition of plant and animal material. They're moving seeds, and they are predators. So this is a group that plays very many valuable roles within agricultural ecosystems and natural ecosystems. This is also a group that has a lot of introduced species in the US, and in the South, of course, red imported fire ants are really a problem on farms, can be a medical issue in some cases, or can interfere with management of lands. So this is one that can be both a medical pest and although it doesn't damage crops directly, can interfere with production processes. But by and large, most ant species are doing a lot of really good work out there. Related to ants are bees, and about 70 to 80% of all bees in the United States are ground nesting bees. So they dig sometimes shallow tunnels, sometimes extremely deep tunnels, in which they lay eggs and then provide food for their larvae when they hatch. And most bees have solitary lives. So unlike ants that form that intricate social network, most bees live as individuals with just the female building the nest and finding plenty of pollen and nectar to feed her young. But as they're going from flower to collect all that pollen and nectar to feed their young, they are moving pollen and contributing significantly and efficiently to wild plants and importantly to many, many, many crops. So this is a hugely valuable group of pollinators as well as soil engineers. Some species that do have shallow burrows are more sensitive to tillage. And some bee species are specialists on pollen of particular plants. So, for example, squash bees collect pollen only from cucurbit species. They'll collect nectar from a wide range of species, but their young can only be raised on cucurbit pollen. So it's an important group for cucurbits because they're so dedicated to that plant. They nest nearby. They're the first there in the morning. So again, there are many important crop pollinator relationships to this group, and they couldn't survive in agricultural landscapes without healthy soils. Oh, here's a quick video of a ground nesting bee. This is a bee that collects pollen from hibiscus. It also, unlike most bees that prefer to nest in soils that have a lot more sand or they can dig in easily, she's bringing pollen back to her nest. These bees like to nest in more compacted soil, and here she is flinging mud balls out of her nest. These bees will carry water back to their nest to moisten the soil in order to make it possible to dig. So I love to show this video because really ground nesting bees do move a lot of soil and are moving nutrients and so forth as they're building their nests. And then their relatives are ground nesting wasps. These can include sand wasps or scarab hunter wasps or cicada hunters or any of the mason wasps or many, many, many solitary wasps out there. And similar to bees, they will dig shallow burrows or sometimes deep nests in the soil. Instead of providing pollen and nectar for their young, they hunt and they track down caterpillars and stink bugs and crickets. In some cases, they have particular pest groups that they focus on. They prefer aphids or caterpillars, while some, like the grass-carrying wasp, feed on crickets or grasshoppers. And then in other cases, they will just eat whatever they can find across the board. So this is a group that are important in pest control and moving soil. And the adults drink nectar, so they can also move pollen between plants and act as pollinators. So another easy to overlook group, but that can be very, very valuable to crops and agriculture. And then I'm wrapping up. There are some soil animals that eat plant roots. Scarab beetle grubs, for example, and click beetle larvae known as wireworms. There are caterpillars that feed underground on roots and then emerge as adult moths. And as they are digging in the soil and feeding on these plant roots, they're improving soil structure for sure. Some of these species, however, can be ornamental plant pests or crop plant pests and can reach an economic threshold at which they do cause damage. That's not all of them, but it is some of them. In a balanced system, ideally there's enough pressure from predatory species to keep these herbivores in check. But sometimes in crop production systems, they need additional control. All right, so that takes us to the end of our journey looking through invertebrate plant profiles. And to circle back, as Kelly mentioned, these animals are doing a lot of things for us. A lot of the things we've talked about, like pollination, biological control, they're moving seeds. I didn't talk about this, but they are a source for wildlife. Birds in particular rely on insects to feed their young, but also many, many other groups of animals rely on insects as a food source and invertebrates as important food sources. And of course, through all their soil work, they're enhancing plant productivity and really just keeping our soils alive and well. And in turn, some of the things we can do to support them that you've probably heard me say over and over again is reduce soil disturbances and make sure we have permanent habitat near cropped areas and think about how to reduce harm from pesticides to non-target animals. And so from there, I'll just leave it. But if there are any questions, pop them in the Q&A, please. And I'll leave you with another open question for you to answer in the chat. Tell me all about the groups of animals that you were most surprised to learn have a connection to the soil. And I will read those during your coffee break.
We do have a few minutes if you want to take, we're a little ahead, which is amazing. We do have a few minutes to take a couple questions if you want.
Yeah,
but
sure.
There are some nice, before we start that, there are some really nice answers to your first open question about, have you thought about soil invertebrates? And there's in the chat, when I started growing native plants and gardening with mostly natives, my thought turned to the soil and what lived there. Sorry, when you bring that diversity in, you notice it. There's a comment that I had no idea that fireflies were predators. So new factoid for that individual today. We do have two questions about nematodes. One is, did you have a picture of a root knot nematode on your slide?
I don't know. I can go back and look, but I'm not sure offhand. I'll have to go back and look at the source of the photo and just verify. Um, so we're interested in learning about root rot.
Root
Um,
root
root,
knot. Yeah, another one of those root feeding potential pest soil insects. And
yeah. Go ahead, Kelly.
to and the second question is from somebody else: how to increase beneficial nematodes.
Uh, beneficial nematodes. Um, I think by maintaining healthy soils that have a balanced system, making sure you have permanent habitat nearby because um, it's really about creating that balanced system. So when we have really simplified landscapes with just one or two crops, for example, not a lot of plant diversity, that sort of winnows down the window of species that can exist in that area. And oftentimes it's things that rely on that crop. That means they're crop pests. And that's true above ground and below ground. So if you have permanent habitat nearby, whether it's forested area, whether it's a meadow, whether it's a hedgerow, or natural areas on farms or in gardens, um, that is a source of beneficial species that can move into those cropped areas after disturbance and so forth and repopulate that area.
Fantastic.
um, there is a way to purchase nematodes and spread them, but I just can't really speak to the level of whether that's a successful approach or a sustainable approach over time, or if it's something you need to do again and again and again. I really don't know that information. I don't know that that information is out there. So a long-term approach is to really just build your system.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have time for one more, and I will follow up, with the chat on unanswered questions. Either we'll revisit them at the end or in a follow up after the webinar. So the next one is, can you share information about the effects of lead contamination on the soil ecosystems? That's a big topic, and I think one that we're still learning a lot about.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say in my own space, I have soil that's contaminated with lead at levels that can potentially be problematic. So it is something I personally um, worked with and thought a lot about. And um, lead, of course, can impact invertebrates that are in that system for sure. There are some that can be more tolerant, but thinking about health impacts to people, some of the most important things you can do are keep the soil covered, or if it's exposed, make sure you've washed your hands so you reduce exposure to yourself. Planting habitat in contaminated areas is a really good thing. There's some evidence that shows that some plants can remediate some of the soil by picking up that lead, pulling it up out of the soil can take a long time. Yes, some organisms are more vulnerable to lead than others. Some that are really resilient to lead include wood lice. They can be exposed to a lot of lead because they have this magic ability to sort of sequester it in their body and keep it separate from impacting a lot of their other organs. And then some are far more sensitive and will either be less diverse or less numerous and in soils with high lead contamination. So remediation looks like adding habitat if you can, keeping it covered, or in some cases, removing the contaminated soil and bringing in new soil if it's really, really, really high levels.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Always amazing. And as many times have I seen that presentation and read the material in the handbook, I always learn something new. So we appreciate your depth and breadth of knowledge. That was fascinating.